Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Professor Elyse Semerdjian. She teaches at Whitman College in Washington State. And we're going to talk about the Middle East, which is her specialization, her area of specialization. Professor Semerdjian, Elyse, thank you for joining us on CivilNet.
Oh, thank you for having me, Salpi.
Elyse, we're going to talk briefly about a really complicated topic, and that's sectarianism in the Middle East. If you just really briefly tell us what that means, and also tell us where Armenians fit into that concept of sectarianism. Do we get lost in that concept of sectarianism?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Sectarianism, I think, has been presented in a number of ways. I think the simplistic view is that it's just religious conflict. But I think a better definition is looking at the way in which religion gets used and infused in politics to sort of leverage positions and, in a way, strengthen the positions of those who decide to use it. And so we see it work out in different ways throughout history and in different contexts. But I would say that there are sectarianisms in the plural rather than one solid form of sectarianism, and we can see different strains of it today.
Does that mean that when you say it's use and abuse of religion, does that mean the religion holder is using it as a category, or the victimizer is using it as a category?
Well, I think we have different uses of it. I think sometimes you see, for example, in Syria, the Assad regime, although it distances itself from sectarianism and portrays itself as secular, it often deploys sectarianism in ways, as well as certain opposition groups, and I think we've seen that much more visibly. Thinking about, for example, Daesh or ISIS, the way in which it deploys sectarianism. So, yeah, it's used by multiple players in order to leverage their position in the conflict. And it's not just religion, but it's religious symbols. And usually it doesn't necessarily have to be accurate, like in the sense of the way it's used. But the religious symbols work to sort of legitimate groups in the way they use it.
If I was going to be really cynical, couldn't I say, you know what, I don't know about sectarianism, but sectarian living, why is it so bad? Let the Sunnis live by themselves, let the Alawis live by themselves, let the Armenians live by themselves, let's just be done with this. Is that totally naive and cynical?
Well, I mean, I think as an Ottoman historian, as somebody who's actually tracing the Armenian community in its earliest formation in Aleppo in the 16th century, I can say that actually sectarian living, at least in the Ottoman context, did do much to preserve communities. So if we're interested in the preservation of communities, maybe there's a lot we could learn from history.
Except that now the world has become so interdependent and small that unless you do this the European way, live and let live, that one's going to eat up the other, which is what we're seeing in Syria.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that was, I think, beneficial to communities in the Ottoman context is that they had autonomy in certain areas, that the state had not penetrated fully into those communities to sort of dictate their everyday life. And so if we're talking about a kind of system in which communities have some autonomy over their affairs, I think there's something beneficial in that, and we could learn from history. As for the Armenians, I mean, we see in the Ottoman period a growing Armenian population, and in fact there was a flourishing Armenian population even before the diasporan Armenians arrived in Aleppo after 1915.
If we think about taking that idea to the next step, that is autonomous sectarian living, do we finally get to the idea of a federal state?
Oh gosh, that is a very difficult question for me to answer. What I would hope, aspire to for the future, is that Armenians can play a role in the peacemaking. I think the other communities have a lot to learn from Armenians, and I think it sounds really chauvinistic of me to say that as an Armenian, we have a lot we could show. But I think the fact that we have political parties, I know we have our own disputes within the community, but we have this very vibrant political establishment. It's been there since the 19th century that I think is at least a model that could be shared to show the way in which Armenians have at least the workings of some sort of multi-party sort of politics in our communities. I think that's one of the contributions we could make. And also, I think Armenians at the table in the peacemaking, whatever that peace will look like in the future, could be very beneficial. The last thing we should do is remove ourselves and stay neutral or stay out of the conversations.
Pick up on that, please, because what appears to be happening now is that we're neither at the table nor really are we neutral. We seem to have aligned with the regime because it brought us stability for so long. Does that mean we've abdicated our right to a future place as a player?
Well, there are some who've looked at the Armenians in Lebanon, and I completely respect the position of neutrality, but as you point out, it's not truly neutral, and it can actually result in complete exclusion in the peace process, and that's what troubles me the most, actually. And so neutrality doesn't necessarily mean that, for example, Armenians can't play a role. I mean, I'm a true advocate of nonviolence. I think the Armenians could actually play a great mediating role and a role to sort of advocate for civil society and nonviolence using our own political experience as a model. I mean, I know we don't think of our own political experience as sophisticated, but it really could be some inroads into thinking about civil society in places like Syria in the future.
Do you have examples? Because you're absolutely right. We don't think of our experience as sophisticated. We think of our experience as, the younger sibling, the adjunct. What are the experiences that you're alluding to that make us more experienced than we think we are?
Well, we have, Hanchag, Dashnaks parties. We have these, parties that have been in operation since 1890s. Maybe we could practice more self-critique, which I think we need to do, to think about ways to further democratize what we have. But we have institutions, and we also have organizational skills in the sense that we have, clubs, we have schools, we have institutions to build on, and wherever we go in the diaspora, these institutions are present. I think that's a true testament to the fortitude of these institutions. And so, are they democratic fully? I think we can talk about that. That's another problem. But we have a working system that I think could become a basis for conversation for civil society in the future.
It sounds like we kind of missed the boat on that possibility, given that on the possibility of becoming an active part in the peace process, given that the political legs of the Armenian community as well as the other communities in Syria were cut off. There wasn't that sort of political awareness and engagement as there was still in Lebanon. So given that we didn't have that political voice, haven't really used it this last 2-3 years during the conflict, can we still get a place at the table if we get our act together?
I mean, I want to be more hopeful. I know you interviewed my colleague Keith Wattenpaugh the other day, and he had a very pessimistic outlook. But and I honestly, I truly am often a pessimist. But because I have stakes in this, and I have family in Aleppo, I want to take a more optimistic route and still think that there could be a political compromise in Syria, and that Armenians could play a role in this if we really show what we can bring to this. And maybe redefine what it means to be neutral. I mean, that neutral doesn't mean, we allow ourselves to sort of drift into the regime's pocket, but that actually we could find our own pathway as peacemakers.
Last question. You're active on Facebook, and you see a lot of the comments that are made out of desperation, out of frustration, on this or the other side, given everything that's happening in Aleppo, to the Armenians, in Kesab. Any comments on the usefulness of all of that?
I am very active on Facebook, but I think inside I'm a Luddite at heart. I really have this aversion to technology in the sense that not all the information is useful. And so the article I wrote about Kesab was really about the way in which social media was really being used to sort of present different versions of events in Kesab.
And we'll link to that.
And I thought that one of the more intriguing was the way, this very sophisticated use of social media by the groups that took over Kasab, and the way in which they propagandized to sort of show that they were protectors of the churches. And now, with the return of Kasab to regime hands, and now we have Armenians going in and filming the destruction of the churches, that wasn't just through the fighting between regime forces and opposition forces, but active destruction of icons and you know, paintings of the Virgin Mary and Christ. I think we can now see for ourselves, you know, what the true version of events is. So yeah, this idea of Syria's Rashomon, it's been this from the beginning, different versions of events, and social media has worked to sort of foment various kinds of misinformation. So it's both useful and not useful.
Absolutely, thank you. That's part of what we need to deal with and will continue to deal with. Thank you, Elyse Semerdjian at Whitman College in Washington State in the United States.
Thank you, Salpi.
And thank you for following us on CivilNet.